Congratulations. You have all chosen to be born at the best time, the most interesting time, and the most important time in the whole of human history. So, well done. That was a very good choice. Give yourselves a pat on the back. This is possibly the most important chart ever produced. This is the history of human welfare since Jesus Christ. And as you can tell, pretty much nothing happened until the start of the Industrial Revolution, and then things got busy. That is GDP, but the same chart would be produced for literacy, for health, lifespan, reduction in child mortality, reduction in death during childbirth, and pretty much any metric of human welfare. And this has been brought about by a couple of things. Firstly, capitalism, and I will come back to that. And also something that this has helped enable, which is the exponential growth in the performance of our technology. That word exponential. This audience has heard a lot about exponential over the last few years, and you're going to hear a lot more about it this next couple of days, and we shouldn't apologise for that. Quite a lot of it will come from David Orban, who has long been associated with Singularity University. I'm a great admirer of the Singularity University, but I really do think that they ought to rebrand because they're not a university, and they seem to be allergic to the word singularity. However, they do exponential in spades, which is a very good thing. Imagine that we all walked out of that door 30 steps. We'd go about 30 metres. Imagine if we could trolley down to the Ministry of Silly Walks and become able to walk 30 exponential steps. So our first step was 1 metre, our second was 2, our third step was 4, our fourth was 8, and so on. Our 30th step would take us to the moon. But actually, to be more specific, our 29th step would take us to the moon, and our 30th step would bring us all the way back. Every step in an exponential process is equivalent to the sum of all the previous steps. And what that means is that in an exponential process, you are always at the beginning. We are still at the beginning of our technological journey. It also means that there are no knees in an exponential curve, or to put it another way, you are always at the knee. And it's amazing how many people get that wrong, including the great Ray Kurzweil. This exponential growth in the power of our technology is not stopping, it's continuing, and it's going to make our lives very exciting. As David said, either in a very good way or in a very bad way. Our most powerful exponential technology is, of course, artificial intelligence, and we know that because it has thrashed us at 4 very important, very difficult challenges. Back in 1997, the best ever human player of chess, probably, Garry Kasparov, was beaten by an IBM system called Deep Blue. Kasparov was very grumpy about that. He accused IBM of cheating, and he was probably right, but he's cheated up a lot since then. In 2011, another IBM system called Watson beat Ken Jennings, best ever human player of a TV quiz show called Jeopardy. And Jennings was much more gracious. He put up a little sign saying, "I for one welcome our new robot overlords." And then in 2016, a system built by DeepMind here in London, but owned by Google, developed a system called AlphaGo, which beat the best ever human player of the game of Go. And that was very important. That was a Sputnik moment for China. Go is a revered game in China, and China sat up and took notice. And Go is particularly revered in military circles. So the Chinese government is now spending a fortune on becoming a world leader in AI. But it was last year that the big game happened. An AI system developed in Singapore assembled an IKEA chair in 9 minutes flat. And I think that means we can all agree that it's game over for the humans. Now, the last 2 games, Go and the IKEA assembly, happened after AI's Big Bang, which was in 2012, when Geoff Hinton figured out how to apply a branch of statistics called machine learning to artificial intelligence. A couple of fun facts about Geoffrey Hinton. He's got 2 ancestors called George, who are quite interesting. He's the great-grandson of George Bull, one of the whose mathematics underpins a lot of modern computing. And even better, he's descended from a man called George Everest, who was a surveyor and used to get very annoyed that his name was mispronounced as Everest all the time. And he never actually saw the mountain which is named after him. So, Geoff Hinton applies machine learning to AI, and in particular deep learning, which is essentially pattern recognition, and now we have machines which make money, lots and lots of money. One particular feature of this is that Google and Facebook have essentially stolen the advertising industry from the mainstream media. And Rupert Murdoch is not happy about this. He doesn't like this one little bit. So he's spent the last few years portraying the tech giants as purveyors of fake news. And he's done so very successfully. We now have quite a strong techlash against the tech giants. You have to admire the chutzpah of this man. He has spent 30 years peddling blatant lies about the EU, which has given us Brexit. And Fox News is essentially Trump's state media. And he is now portraying the tech industry as the purveyor of fake news. Now, the exponential growth of AI is, of course, dependent on the exponential growth of our machines, our computers, and I'm sure everybody in this room is aware that the smartphone in your pocket has more compute power than NASA had when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon. And that is true, but it's out of date. A top-end toaster now has more compute power than NASA had when they sent Neil Armstrong to the moon, which makes you think how incredibly brave those astronauts were to go into space relying on the smarts of a toaster. Moore's law, excuse me, you will hear people saying that Moore's law is dead or it's dying, and it's not true. There is plenty more. There's plenty more. In fact, there's more in this room. And so I think that during the course of this century, this exponential growth in the power of AI will bring us to singularities. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the technological singularity, which is the more important one, it's further away, but mostly about the economic singularity, which is more urgent. I don't want to say too much about the technological singularity, although I will say that despite some fairly silly skepticism about it, including Andrew Ng's rather glib remark that we should be more worried about overpopulation on Mars, I hate to disagree with the great Ben Goertel, but I'm afraid I'm going to disagree with the great Ben Goertel. I think that Nick Bostrom is right about the time frame of this. I think it's towards the end of this century that we will get artificial general intelligence, which is a term that I think we owe to Ben. And because machines can be improved in ways which humans cannot, the machines will go on to become super intelligent, and we will become the second smartest species on the planet. And so the most important job for humanity this century, and quite possibly ever, is to make sure that the first superintelligence on this planet really, really likes humans and understands us better than we understand ourselves. And the good news is that these 4 existential risk organisations employ quite a few very smart people who are working on that problem. As I say, I think we've probably got 50 to 70 years or so to solve this problem, and there's a pretty good chance we'll do it. However, we're not paying as much serious attention to the economic singularity, which is a bit bizarre because it's all over the papers, but nobody thinks about it very seriously. And what it is automation. It's the idea that machines will take our jobs, and of course the classic example is the agricultural industry, where in 1880, 80% of all Americans who worked were working on farms. And that number was down to 40% in 1900, and now it's down to about 1%. And that was a really difficult transition. A lot of people died in this transition as populations moved to the city. But in the long run, it didn't work out badly for humans, because the automation in agriculture was mechanization. Machines took the muscle jobs. And when the machines took the muscle jobs, the humans had something else to offer. We had our cognitive abilities. And so the descendants of those farm labourers are in this room and working in shops and offices and factories around the world. But it didn't work out so well for the horse. The horse had terrific muscle power, and in 1915 there were 21.5 million horses working in America. Turns out 1915 was peak horse, and the horse population of America today is 2 million. That is really serious technological unemployment. We know that drivers are going to be automated fairly soon. Self-driving vehicles will be ready for prime time sometime in the early 2020s, and in the following 10 to 20 years, human drivers will disappear, first in cities and on highways and then eventually in rural areas. And we know that the same will happen in factories and warehouses and call centres. But it isn't just blue-collar jobs. It isn't just low-paid, repetitive work. Lawyers and doctors, accountants, architects, they're going to see their work encroached on as well. So it doesn't really matter if you're a barrister or if you're a barista. And it doesn't matter whether you're blue-collar or white-collar. The AI is colorblind. It will take the job of the blue-collar person just as much, or the white-collar person just as much as the job of the blue-collar person. Now, many economists, the few political leaders who think about this seriously, and pretty much everybody who runs a tech giant, is in flat-out denial of this. They say that automation creates wealth. Wealth creates demand, demand creates more jobs, and this is what's always happened in the past, and therefore it's what will happen in the future. And you can already tell that's a really stupid argument. One thing we know is that past performance is no guarantee of future outcome. If it was, we wouldn't be able to fly. I think the skeptics are making two big mistakes. The first is they're thinking too short-term. They're not thinking about what happens 20 or 30 years ahead. And the other is that they're ignoring exponential growth. Assuming Moore's law or something like it continues, the machines we have in 10 years' time will be 128 times more powerful than the machines we have today. And the machines we have in 20 years' time will be 8,000 times more powerful, and in 30 years, 1,000,000 times more powerful. And I think, frankly, it's a bit silly to deny that those machines will take pretty much all the jobs that we have today. I think it's dangerous and complacent to deny the possibility, we don't know for sure, but the possibility of technological unemployment. So some people say that we will invent lots of nice new jobs which machines could never do. For instance, a lot of people think that we will all do caring jobs. We will all be each other's doctors and nurses and therapists. And that might happen, but I have my doubts. In Japan, they're at the forefront of the greying of society, and they don't allow much immigration, so they have a shortage of people to look after their elder folk. And they're quite technophile. So they're using robots increasingly to look after their older people, and it turns out old people quite like being looked after by robots. I suspect, getting that direction myself, is that the reason is that you can tell a robot the same joke 1,000 times a day, and it doesn't care. Now, technological unemployment isn't going to happen next year, and it's not going to happen in the next 10 years. In the short term, what's going to happen is there's going to be a lot more churn. Humans are going to have to change jobs more often. They're going to have to change careers more often. We're going to have to get a lot better at retraining and reskilling, because we're not very good at that at the moment. But in the longer run, I think we need to figure out how to make a jobless society, a jobless economy, survivable, and in fact, delightful. And I think we can. I think the people who say we will always do jobs, I think they're pessimists. There are, of course, one or two problems with the idea of a future in which we all don't work and we play and have fun and learn and explore all the time. The one that occurs to most people first is, what will we do for meaning when we don't have jobs? And I don't think this is the real problem. I think there's two categories of people who prove you do not need to have a job to have meaning in your life. One of them is comfortably off retired people. Now, I know you can't tell by looking at me, but I am of an age where I know a lot of these people, and they are all very busy and very happy, and if you offer them a job, they will speak to you in robust Anglo-Saxon language. The other group is aristocrats. For centuries, no jobs and no great wave of existential despair. The real problem is money, or resources. How do we pay for all the people who don't have jobs? A lot of people think the answer is universal basic income. There are a lot of problems with universal basic income, and the biggest one is the little word in the middle, basic. At its best, what universal basic income does is make everybody poor. And that's frankly just not good enough. We have to make everybody rich. Now, this is a really crazy idea, but I think we can make everybody rich if we can evolve the economy of abundance, also known as the Star Trek economy, in which the cost of all the goods and services that you need for a very good standard of living, say a middle-class American standard of living, are very cheap. Not free, because we want to retain the market. The market is a really good mechanism for resource allocation, but nearly free. And the result of that would be that the taxes, which are going to have to be levied on the people who are still working and the people with money, and I'm obviously looking at Mark Zuckerberg and Bill Gates, don't have to be so onerous that they go off to the Cayman Islands and surround themselves with high walls and machines of formidable defensive capability. Now, it sounds crazy, but if you think about the music industry, you can see how it might happen. When I was young, and admittedly that was a while ago, it was impossible for even a rich person to listen to all the music that they might ever want to listen to. And now it's £10 a month. Now, music obviously is digital, it's infinitely replicatable, it's weightless. Can we have the equivalent for clothing and for construction? Can we have clothify and constructify? I think we can. We need to do three things. Firstly, we need to remove humans from the production processes for all of our goods and services, and that is exactly what automation does. Secondly, we need to make energy really, really cheap, and this is happening. The cost of solar cells is on an exponentially declining cost curve, and although they are not cost competitive with digging up dead dinosaurs at the moment, in a few years they will be. In 20 or 30 years, it's quite likely that electricity will be almost too cheap to meter. And the third thing is we use artificial intelligence to make all our production processes incredibly efficient, to minimize the use of raw materials and choose sustainable raw materials and use as little of them as possible. So I think we can get abundance through cost reduction. And I think the big danger is panic. Because what may happen in 10 years, 15 years, is that many people, most people, will realize that technological unemployment, despite the blandishments of Schmidt and Pichon and so on, technological unemployment is coming, and they don't yet believe, perhaps they haven't even heard of, the economy of abundance. Now, when we panic, one of the things that we do is we elect really bad politicians. Politicians who tell us lies and tell us that they're going to take us back to a past which was better than the present. And of course they can't, because the past wasn't better than the present, and their politicians don't work. So we need a plan. We need a plan for how to navigate the economic singularity. I think we should set up a series of institutions, like those institutions studying the technological singularity, like the existential risk organizations, to figure out how we make this transition. And unfortunately, at the moment, our politicians are paying this no attention whatsoever because they're preoccupied by the great right-wing populist surge. And obviously, we need to defeat this as soon as possible. So we need to reverse Brexit, we need to put Trump in jail. And I hope and believe that those things will happen in the next 2 or 3 years. But what we have to be careful about is that we don't then fall into the equal and opposite trap of left-wing populism. Because populism is not just a feature of the right. People on the left also tell lies about there having been a better society in the past and how we're going to go back to it. The left-wing populists will tell us that capitalism has created a society of worse inequality than we've ever had before, and that it needs to be abolished. Now, there are a lot of things wrong with capitalism. It needs a lot of reform. But it is one of the forces which has led to today being the best time ever to be alive. So we need to be very careful about people like this. The other thing we need to be very careful about is this idea that we're at the start of the fourth industrial revolution. A meme which has been very successfully pimped by Klaus Schmidt, founder of the World Economic Forum. I think it's a pernicious idea, as well as just being wrong, because it radically understates the scale of the change that's coming. What's coming is, what we're in now is the beginning of the information revolution, and the information revolution will have a much bigger impact on all of us than any of the previous revolutions we've been through. And the idea of the fourth industrial revolution is one of the things that's kind of pinning politicians' feet to the floor. They're not able to understand the scale of the changes because of that idea. So, we do have the power to create a very wonderful future, but there's a lot of work to do. Thank you.